During a heated Prosperity Now rally, corporate lobbyist Marcus Thorne took the stage and fired shots at President Zohran Mamdani, publicly calling him a tyrant in front of a roaring crowd. But Mamdani, never one to be provoked, was preparing a response that would completely humiliate the rally's orchestrators and turn the entire narrative upside down. What happened next left the crowd in shock. This moment has sparked a national debate and is going viral for all the right reasons. The crowd roared as Marcus Thorne climbed onto the rally stage, fists raised, veins pulsing. The banner behind him read, "Stop Mamdani's War on Business," in aggressive block letters, flapping against the wind in Zuccotti Park. It was September 24th, 2025, a day meant for national progress. The day of the President's Housing for All Summit, where he planned to unveil a bill to combat corporate landlordism. But this rally was no policy debate. It was chaos. Thorne gripped the mic like a weapon. His voice thundered over speakers. "Zohran Mamdani is a reckless, dangerous socialist. He must be stopped before he destroys our economy." The crowd, a mix of genuinely worried small business owners, hired professional agitators, and masked individuals, screamed in approval. Cameras flashed. Scaffolding was torn down. A union banner was set on fire in a corner. What no one knew was that this wasn't just a rally. It had been orchestrated, funded by the deep pockets of Wall Street billionaires, led by the infamous Stephen A. Schwarzman. As Thorne kept ranting, distant sirens echoed. But across town, in the middle of the summit, Mamdani hadn't said a word yet. He was watching, waiting, and when he would speak, the world would never forget it. President Mamdani stood calmly on the platform at the Housing for All Summit, hands clasped as a community choir sang a song of solidarity. His face didn't flinch, but his heart was heavy. Instead of hope, chaos filled the streets of New York. He hadn't yet responded to the vitriol, not because he couldn't, but because he knew something more was coming. Behind him, union leaders, tenant advocates, and families facing eviction stood in support. It should have been a perfect day, but intelligence had come in that morning. The Prosperity Now rally wasn't just a rally, it was a cover-up, a trap. Hidden among the crowd were violent provocateurs, hired through shadowy security firms. They had one mission: destabilize. And at the center of it all, Stephen A. Schwarzman. Mamdani's team had tracked the payments. Schwarzman and a few Wall Street elites had funneled money through dark money packs into fake small business groups, knowing full well that these groups would incite violence, destroy property, and cause panic. But Mamdani wasn't angry. He was focused, laser-focused. His response wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical, and it would leave the nation in tears. 3 hours after the rally erupted, Mamdani finally stood behind a podium, this time in front of a quiet press room. The world tuned in. Reporters stood silent. Social media was already on fire. Mamdani leaned forward, eyes steady, and spoke just one sentence. "Marcus Thorne and his backers aren't angry because my housing plan is criminal. They're angry because I caught them funding criminals to hurt American families." A wave of gasps filled the room. Then came the documents. Mamdani held them up in his hand: offshore bank records, encrypted chats from Schwarzman's firm, a whistleblower affidavit from a junior executive, all showing direct financial links between Schwarzman's corporate network and the rally's funding. CNN cut to commercial. Fox Business went quiet, but social media exploded. #Schwarzman exposed. Mamdani was right. Prosperity Now hoax. But what shattered the nation wasn't just the evidence. It was Marcus Thorne's face when he saw the video go viral. He didn't speak, he didn't blink, he disappeared from the stage. But Mamdani wasn't done. He promised justice, and that justice was coming tonight. As President Mamdani finished his one sentence, the press room stood still. No one moved. Even the harshest critics didn't speak. On screen, the documents he held began circulating. News anchors blinked in confusion. But the American people, they understood. The evidence was crystal clear. Stephen A. Schwarzman and his allies had funneled millions to a small business outreach group. That group didn't buy ads or flyers. It bought bricks, burner phones, and bust-in agitators from private security firms. One of them, a man now in custody, admitted everything. A mother watching from a tenement in the Bronx clutched her chest. Her son, a union organizer, had been injured in the chaos just a day earlier trying to protect people. She cried hard. "How could these billionaires do this?" she whispered. Mamdani didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply said, "You don't call a man a tyrant when he just saved the country from your fire." And with that, he walked away. But for Schwarzman, this was just the beginning of his unraveling. Backstage at the rally, Marcus Thorne stared at his phone, sweat gathering under his collar. He had just gotten a text, one word, from a contact inside Schwarzman's company. Leaked. He tried to stand but stumbled back into his chair. The crowd outside still chanted against Mamdani, but even they hadn't seen what was coming. Within minutes, the footage dropped. Not from Mamdani, but from a whistleblower. A private recording from a gala dinner weeks earlier. Thorne and Schwarzman laughing, raising glasses with other financiers. Schwarzman was heard saying, "Mamdani thinks this summit will be peaceful. We'll remind him who really controls the streets." It spread like wildfire. Millions watched. Thousands wept. A young teacher in Michigan, who had been evicted by one of Schwarzman's subsidiary companies, cried into her husband's arms, "We fought for a better life, not for billionaires like him to burn it all down for profit." Meanwhile, Mamdani stayed silent because he knew the people were speaking for him now. And justice, it was coming faster than anyone expected. The Situation Room buzzed. Mamdani sat calmly, surrounded by economic and legal advisors. His phone buzzed. A call from the Attorney General. "Sir," the voice said, "you were right. We found financial trails linking Schwarzman's fund to illegal dark money pools. There's more than enough for charges of market manipulation and conspiracy." Mamdani didn't smile. He nodded. "Then it's time." Aides rushed to prepare a press release, but Mamdani stopped them. "No need. Let it happen naturally. They'll eat each other alive." Back on Wall Street, executives scrambled. Some distanced themselves. Some doubled down. But Thorne, he had vanished. Meanwhile, outside the White House, a small group of tenants and activists who had been saved from eviction by Mamdani's earlier executive orders knelt in a candlelight vigil, praying for him. One woman clutched a copy of her new lease and whispered through tears, "I used to doubt politics could help us. But today, I'm proud he's our president." And for the first time in hours, President Mamdani walked out to the Rose Garden and waved silently to the nation. It wasn't a speech, it was a statement. The calm before the storm. Miles away from D.C., in a small Michigan town, a retired auto worker named Harold Jennings sat in silence. His son, Luke Jennings, a young community organizer, had been injured the night before at the Prosperity Now rally, hit in the spine by a metal object thrown from the crowd of agitators. The hospital said he might never walk again. As Harold watched President Mamdani's revelation play on a tiny hospital TV, his hands trembled. Then came the clip. Schwarzman's private gala, the billionaires laughing about the coming chaos, and suddenly Harold broke. He sobbed, not just for his son, but for the betrayal. He had been a union man his whole life, skeptical of politicians, but always believing in a fair day's work. Now something inside him shifted. "This man, Mamdani, he tried to protect us from them," Harold whispered to his daughter, "and they tried to break our city for a headline." Tears streamed down both their faces. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was personal. Too personal. Outside the hospital window, a tattered union banner fluttered from a flagpole. And for Harold, the pain turned into a prayer. Let justice come fast. Back at Zuccotti Park, the Prosperity Now rally was collapsing. The same crowd that had once cheered Thorne's fiery insults now stood frozen, phones in hand, watching Mamdani's press conference play out live. Gasps, whispers. The genuinely concerned small business owners walked away quietly, shaking their heads. Others began arguing with the obvious agitators. Then it started, a chant, soft at first, from a group of students and tenants near the back. "We're the 99%. We are the 99%. A young woman who had been leading chants against Mamdani's job-killing policies dropped her sign. She was crying. She had just seen a video of her uncle, a former factory worker, explaining how Schwarzman's company had bought out his plant, busted the union, and left the town to rust. the same tactics now being used to create chaos. The truth felt like a punch to the gut. Nearby, a man in a black hoodie tried to rile up the crowd again, but was shouted down. "You lied to us," someone screamed. "We were used." It wasn't a rally anymore. It was an awakening, and the man who had been mocked just hours ago had flipped the nation with one sentence. Just after sunset, flashing lights lit up a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. Federal agents moved fast, storming a lavish office suite several floors below Schwarzman's own. Inside, they found encrypted laptops, burner phones, offshore account ledgers, and one of Thorne's junior lobbyists trembling, caught red-handed. The media scrambled. Fox Business tried to spin it. CNBC stuttered. But the footage was real. The Department of Justice confirmed it. Meanwhile, President Mamdani remained silent. He didn't need to say anything. His one sentence had already pulled the first thread, and now the fabric of corporate impunity was unraveling on its own. In the West Wing, Mamdani stood by a window, arms crossed, watching the city lights. "Sir," an aide said quietly, "the people are listening again." Mamdani didn't smile. He simply nodded and said, "Good, then let's make sure they hear each other." Inside the Oval Office, President Mamdani sat quietly. A freshly opened envelope lay before him. It wasn't from an advisor or a journalist. It was a handwritten letter from a 14-year-old girl named Sophia in the Bronx. "Dear President Mamdani, my big sister is a tenant organizer. She was at the summit, so proud. When the paid rioters started throwing things, she stood in front of an elderly woman's wheelchair and got hit in the face. I heard what those rich men said about you. I saw your speech. I just want to say thank you for standing strong for us. Sophia." Mamdani's hand paused over the paper. For a moment, he didn't speak. Behind him, his policy advisor cleared his throat. "Sir, the networks are asking if you want to go live again." Mamdani glanced at the letter, then he looked up. "No," he said. "The truth needs room to breathe. Let the people talk." And with that, he picked up his pen and began writing back. Outside the White House, thousands gathered, not to protest, but to sing. The quiet, determined melody of "Solidarity Forever" filled the air. The nation wasn't falling apart. It was waking up. Somewhere in a secure media room in a corporate tower, Marcus Thorne stared into a single camera lens. This was his last shot, a desperate video statement. He tried to sound confident. The rally was peaceful. President Mamdani is twisting facts. This is political vengeance against job creators. But his voice cracked. His hands trembled. The world had seen too much. As the video went live, people paused to watch. But by the end, they weren't angry. They were disappointed. Even former allies began distancing themselves. A well-known pro-business commentator quietly admitted on live TV, "We were told this was about symbolic opposition to policy, not funding street violence. If what Mamdani revealed is real, corporate America has crossed a terrifying line." The comments under Thorne's video flooded in. "My mother lost her home because of your boss's company. You called him a socialist, but he brought the truth. We believed in you. Not anymore." Somewhere in that mountain of heartbreak, Thorne stared at the screen and whispered to himself, "What have I done?" That night, as storms moved in over the city, wind tore through Zuccotti Park. Most protest signs lay scattered, wet, and forgotten. But one thing remained. On a piece of plywood covering a broken window, a community mural was already taking shape. At its center was the face of an injured union organizer. A note was pinned beneath it, "For the ones who stood for us when others didn't." A little girl in a raincoat stood near it, crying softly. Her father, a volunteer street medic, had been hurt at the rally. A news crew tried to speak to her, but she just pointed up at the mural and whispered, "He helps people." Back at the White House, Mamdani was briefed about the scene. He said nothing for a long time. Then just before midnight, he stepped onto the White House balcony, looked out at the city, and gave a simple, determined nod. It wasn't for cameras. There were none. It was for the people. The movement still grew, and so would the truth. In a small apartment in New Jersey, Maria Delgado held her son close. He was only 6 years old, and the night before he had asked her, "Mom, why did the men set fire to the community center?" Her husband, firefighter Felix Delgado, had nearly died protecting the building when violence broke out. He had been struck in the head by a brick thrown by a masked agitator, someone the DOJ now confirmed was on the payroll of the shell corporation tied to Schwarzman's team. Maria wiped her tears as the Mamdani broadcast played again on their old TV. Schwarzman didn't protest for justice, Mamdani had said. He protested because I exposed his web of greed and the ones he paid to do his dirty work. Maria whispered, "Thank you, Mr. President," as her son clutched a small firefighter's helmet from his father's locker. That night, she cried until her voice broke. Not because of what Mamdani said, but because he said what no one else dared to say. Across the city, a quiet moment was shattered when an unknown agitator threw a bottle at a striking sanitation worker standing near the park. But this time, something shifted. Bystanders didn't cheer. They booed. Some even tackled the agitator themselves before the police arrived. News crews caught it all. One clip went viral instantly. A young tech worker who had been at the rally earlier, holding the agitator back, yelling, "He fights for you, man." People started realizing they had been misled, that the rally wasn't about economic freedom, but a cover for corporate manipulation. And all it took to expose it was one sentence. Mamdani hadn't used hatred, he hadn't yelled, he had simply told the truth. Now the people were doing the rest. What had started as rage was turning into remorse. And the streets that were once filled with smoke were now flooded with voices of unity, shame, and heartbreak. At exactly 7:33 p.m., a breaking alert appeared on every major network. A whistleblower, a young woman named Rebecca, formerly a data analyst on Schwarzman's PR team, had come forward with damning files, emails, chat logs, and internal strategy notes. They showed clearly how Schwarzman's team had planned for the rally to look organic while planting operatives who would incite chaos. In one strategy memo, Marcus Thorne had written, "Let Mamdani look calm. The crazier we make the streets, the more the media will frame his policies as the cause." Rebecca's voice trembled in her interview. "I joined thinking we were changing the economic conversation. But this was evil. I couldn't live with it anymore." Millions watched speechless. Some cried, some apologized online for ever doubting Mamdani. And deep in the West Wing, Mamdani watched too, arms folded, expressions still. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. America was waking up. At a public school in Detroit, the principal interrupted morning assembly. A substitute teacher, a retired union steward named Mr. Harlan, had something to say. He stood quietly before a room of 4th and 5th graders. His hands shook, not from nerves, but from something deeper. "Yesterday," he said, "some of you might have seen scary things on TV. People yelling, fires, men in suits calling our president a socialist." The room was quiet. "But I want you to know, real strength isn't about having the most money or yelling the loudest. It's about standing in solidarity with your neighbor, even when the world tries to scare you." One girl raised her hand. "Wasn't it President Mamdani's big summit day?" Mr. Harlan smiled softly. "Yes, and while they paid people to throw rocks, he stood in silence for all of us." Later, the kids drew thank you cards addressed to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. One had a big heart with the words, "You're not a bad word, Mr. Mamdani. You're my hero." When the stack reached the White House mailroom later that afternoon, staffers cried. It wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. Senator Dale Lockwood sat in his dark office, watching the Schwarzman revelations unfold across 5 news channels at once. He wasn't a socialist, but he had taken donations from Schwarzman and silently backed the Prosperity Now rally. Now it was burning him from the inside out. An aide knocked gently. "Senator, we're being flooded with calls. People are furious." He nodded. "I know." He turned back to the screen. Rebecca, the whistleblower, was testifying live now. Her voice cracked as she said, "They wanted Americans to think Mamdani was the danger, but they were the ones planning it." Lockwood rubbed his eyes. His own granddaughter had been in that rally crowd, thinking it was a genuine movement. She could have been hurt. She could have died. He picked up the phone and made a private call to the Department of Justice. "Do what you have to do," he said, his voice thick, "even if it's one of our own." And for the first time in his long career, he wept. In a small town outside Philadelphia, a firefighter's dress uniform hat was folded and handed to a crying mother. It was the funeral for firefighter Felix Delgado, who had died protecting a community center set on fire by one of the Prosperity Now agitators. As the bagpipes played, President Mamdani appeared quietly, unannounced. The crowd parted. The mother, Maria, sobbing, tried to stand but collapsed into his arms. "He believed in you," she whispered. "He said you were fighting for us." Mamdani didn't speak. He simply held her. Across the country, the live stream of the funeral cut through all political lines. The image of a grieving widow in the arms of her president said more than any speech ever could. It was no longer a fight between left and right. It was about truth, pain, and healing. And justice was knocking at Stephen Schwarzman's door. A reporter was interviewing people near Zuccotti Park when something unexpected happened. A little boy, no older than 9, tugged on the microphone. He wore a cap with a Union local number on it and had dried tears on his face. His name was Jordan. His dad was a Union organizer injured the night of the rally. The reporter knelt down. "Why are you here, Jordan?" He looked straight into the camera and said softly, "Because Mr. Schwarzman lied. My dad got hurt because of his fake rally. But President Mamdani, he didn't scream or fight. He told the truth." The crowd nearby grew quiet. The boy continued, voice trembling. "I want to be like President Mamdani. Not because he's powerful, but because he's brave enough to speak up when rich people lie." That moment was shared over 50 million times within hours. Even people who once mocked Mamdani fell silent. No hashtags, no shouting. Just one boy reminding America what truth sounds like. On a corner in the Bronx, a community church sat silent. Today, it was packed with mourners. 3 parishioners, all volunteers for a food pantry, had died in the rally fires after their van was mistakenly targeted by rioters paid to escalate the scene. Inside, the pastor, Reverend Wilkins, stood at the pulpit. He didn't talk politics. "We were told this was a fight for justice," he said, his voice heavy. "But justice doesn't burn down community centers. Justice doesn't leave children without parents. Truth does not wear a mask and light a match." As the organ played a low hymn, a woman in the third pew collapsed in sobs. Her son had begged her not to go to the rally. He said it felt wrong. She whispered, "He was right." And at that exact moment, as the church bells rang outside, someone played Mamdani's single sentence through a speaker by the gate. The whole block stopped to listen. "Schwarzman isn't mad because my plan broke the law. He's mad because I exposed his." Just before sunset, something happened in D.C. that hadn't happened in decades. A line of aging workers, coal miners, nurses, auto workers, some leaning on canes, began marching silently from the National Mall toward the headquarters of the SEC. No chants, no signs, just the sound of work boots on pavement. A retired steelworker named Curtis held a Union flag over his shoulder. He hadn't walked that far in a decade. When asked why he came, he simply said, "I buried friends in factory accidents for this country. I won't let billionaires disgrace their memory with lies and greed." Thousands joined behind them. When they reached the steps, a speaker played Mamdani's words again. But this time it wasn't about Mamdani anymore. It was about every person who had suffered in silence, now finding the courage to speak. In Stephen A. Schwarzman, he was nowhere to be found. Hidden in a private hotel suite under an alias, he sat hunched over a desk scattered with legal memos. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring until a second call came through. This time it was marked, Justice Dept. He answered, voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Schwarzman," the voice said coldly, "we have the evidence. Offshore transactions, wire transfers to shell corporations, encrypted group threads planning market manipulation. You're going to be indicted." Schwarzman said nothing. He couldn't. The voice continued. "You thought you could use chaos to win a message war, but the only message you sent was that you were willing to let people bleed to protect your portfolio." Silence again. Then the voice delivered the final blow. "And America believes Mamdani now. Even the ones who didn't before." Schwarzman hung up. Then he buried his face in his palms and began to sob. Not out of guilt, but because he finally knew it was over. At a small candlelight vigil in Ohio, a grandmother named Elsie Simmons stood up to speak. She wasn't famous, Just the grandmother of Luke Jennings, the community organizer still fighting in the hospital. She held a picture of him in one hand and a worn Union card in the other. With tears in her voice, she said, "I don't care about your politics, but when a man like President Mamdani stands and tells the truth about the powerful, while those same people light fires in our streets, we must listen." The crowd, mostly silent, bowed their heads. One young woman streamed it live on her phone. Within hours, that short clip had 18 million views. The top comment read, "I cried harder at this than anything this year. I was wrong about Mamdani. I see it now." America wasn't just listening anymore. They were feeling the truth, and it was breaking them in the best way. At exactly 9:00 p.m., President Mamdani appeared again. No podium, no stage, just a chair, a flag, and the truth. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Yesterday at our Housing for All summit, while some tried to turn our streets into war zones, they called me a tyrant. But now the truth speaks louder than insults." He paused. "Their greed hurt real Americans. But justice is here, not because I screamed, but because we stood together." Then he held up one thing, the thank you drawing from Sophia in the Bronx. "This means more to me than any title, because America's children deserve to grow up with a roof over their heads, not in fear." Millions cried watching. And somewhere in a dark room, Stephen Schwarzman watched too, his face pale as the walls finally started closing in. It was supposed to be a routine morning news segment, but when Channel 5 invited Linda Hayes, mother of a slain social worker who died at the community center fire, no one expected what followed. She sat in silence for a moment. The anchor asked gently, "Linda, is there anything you'd like to say to America?" Her lips quivered. Then through tears she whispered, "My son believed in decency. He died doing his job because a billionaire wanted to create a show." The studio went silent. Linda pulled out a crumpled note from her purse. Her son's last text message to her. "Mom, if anything happens, tell President Mamdani to never stop fighting. He's doing it for us." It went viral in under an hour. Comments poured in, "I can't stop crying. I judged him too harshly. This mother's pain is America's pain." And Stephen Schwarzman's name, once linked to power, was now permanently tied to grief. Late that afternoon, an emergency congressional hearing was held, not to defend a politician, but to investigate corporate corruption. Progressive and moderate senators sat united, documents and whistleblower testimony stacked in front of them. The evidence was overwhelming. Illegal dark money, coordinated violence, internal memos tying Schwarzman's team to hired agitators, and then a video was played, the never-before-seen clip from the gala. Schwarzman raising a glass, joking, "Let them have their summit. We'll light the fire while they talk about helping the poor." A gasp echoed through the chamber. One pro-business senator whispered, "We were lied to." The chairman paused, looked into the camera, and said, "This is no longer about markets. This is about betrayal." Just after 6:45 p.m., President Mamdani stepped onto the White House lawn. He held no notes. He simply looked out over the cameras and said, "Mr. Schwarzman didn't just try to discredit me. He tried to tear the soul out of this country. But this country doesn't belong to the billionaires who lie for profit. It belongs to those who build it, who care for it, even when they're mocked for it." He turned toward the rows of workers standing in solidarity. To the organizers, to the mothers, to the children who prayed for justice, this moment belongs to you. And to those who tried to burn down our communities for greed, the fire you lit has only illuminated the strength of our solidarity. The crowd broke into tears. Even news anchors cried on live TV. It was no longer about revenge. It was a moment of national redemption. By sunrise, the courthouse in D.C. was surrounded, not by protesters, but by everyday Americans, teachers, nurses, farmers, families. Inside, Stephen Schwarzman stood before a federal judge, pale and wordless. The prosecution laid out the final evidence: conspiracy to incite civil unrest and felony market manipulation. The judge didn't raise his voice. "Mr. Schwarzman," he said, "your actions have endangered lives, divided a nation, and weaponized wealth for political gain. You will be held fully accountable." As the gavel slammed down, the sentence was confirmed. Schwarzman was convicted. The nation watched live. Some wept from relief, others from closure. A former critic of Mamdani commented online, "I used to think he was the villain. I was wrong. Today he saved our country from itself." And somewhere in a modest house in Michigan, the retired auto worker Harold Jennings saluted his TV screen and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. President." All across the country, in homes and schools, community gardens were planted in once divided neighborhoods. In Chicago, a local union hall that had been vandalized during the rally reopened its doors. Inside, candles flickered beneath a handwritten banner, "Truth outlives greed." President Mamdani, back at the White House, received one final surprise. His team had compiled letters, thousands of them, from mothers, workers, and children who thanked him for standing strong. One letter read, "You didn't fight back with hate, you fought back with proof, and you gave us hope again." Mamdani stood by the window holding that letter in silence. Outside, people gathered, not to protest but to sing, quietly, proudly, "This land is your land." And for the first time in years, it felt whole again. That evening, Mamdani addressed the nation one last time. He stood calmly, no teleprompter, no applause, just him and the truth. "The personal attacks, they didn't bother me. What bothered me was the pain they caused, the lies, the lives broken. But today, America stood up. You, the people, flipped the script. You brought back dignity, justice, and truth." He paused. Then came the line that made the entire room weep. "I didn't defend myself to protect a title. I did it for every mother who feared eviction, for every worker who stood on a picket line, for every kid who drew me a picture and called me a hero." The screen faded to black, and in that silence, millions cried from homes, phones, and hospital beds. My friends, if this story moved you, please like this video if you believe in truth. Comment below. Tell us which part touched your heart the most. Subscribe to this channel for more real, emotional, and powerful stories that bring light into the world. Share this with someone who needs hope right now. Let's remind the world that solidarity always wins.